Picture this. Your small hands tremble as you arrange obsidian blades in perfect rows, each one sharp enough to slice through bone like cutting through morning mist. The cold stone beneath your feet has drunk so much blood over the years that it's stained permanently black, and you wonder if the gods can taste the difference between yesterday's offerings and today's. You are 7 years old when they choose you, not for anything you've done, but for what the calendar stones say about the day you were born. The priests examine your teeth, your fingernails, the way you hold your head when they speak the sacred words. They nod to each other in the language adults use when children aren't supposed to understand, though you catch enough words to know your fate has been decided. "This one has the sight," murmurs the priest with jaguar spots painted across his cheeks. His breath smells like copal incense and something else, something metallic that makes your stomach twist. The gods have marked her for service. Your mother weeps when they tell her, but quietly, the way women cry when crying won't change anything. She presses a small jade bead into your palm before they lead you away, whispering words you'll remember long after her face begins to fade from memory. "Be brave, little star. Remember that the gods see everything, even when we cannot see them." The Karmakak sits high above the city, like a stone bird perched on the mountainside. From your sleeping mat, you can see the lake stretching endlessly in all directions, dotted with floating gardens that look like green jewels scattered across dark water. Other children brought here speak different languages, worship gods with different names, but you all share the same hollow look, the expression of those who know they belong to something larger and hungrier than themselves. The days blur together in a rhythm of lessons and ceremonies. You learn to read the sacred books with their pictures of feathered serpents and bleeding hearts. You memorize prayers in the old language, words that feel like stones in your mouth. You practice walking without making sound, holding your breath until spots dance before your eyes, cutting your earlobes with cactus thorns to prove your dedication. But it's the counting that haunts your dreams. Every morning, the senior priests recite the numbers from the previous day's offerings. 3 hearts for the dawn ceremony, 7 for the midday blessing, 15 captives brought back from the flower wars. The priests speak these figures like merchants discussing grain harvests, their voices flat and businesslike. You realize that somewhere, mothers are counting too, counting the children who didn't come home. The other students accept this easily. Nekali, a boy from the mountains whose eyes are the color of deep water, explains it to you during the evening meal. "The gods made themselves into the world," he says, tearing his maize cake into careful pieces. "They gave their blood so we could live. Now we give ours back. It's fair." But fairness feels different when you're the one being prepared for giving. Your teachers are kind, in their way. They bring you honey cakes on feast days and let you tend the sacred rabbits in the temple courtyard. They teach you songs about flowers and butterflies, never mentioning that both are symbols for warriors destined to die young. When you excel at memorizing the ritual calendar, they praise your quick mind. When you stumble over the pronunciation of blood-blessing prayers, they're patient with your corrections. Still, you notice things they don't expect you to see. How the priests' hands shake during the pre-dawn ceremonies. How they drink pulque wine before the larger sacrifices, their faces growing distant and glassy. How they burn certain herbs that make the air thick and dreamy, as if even they need help accepting what they do. One evening, while organizing ceremonial masks in the storage chamber, you discover something that makes your breath catch in your throat. Hidden behind robes, stiff with dried blood, you find a collection of personal belongings. A child's wooden doll, a young man's obsidian mirror, a woman's weaving tools, each item carefully labelled with a date and a name you don't recognize. The belongings of the offered ones, kept like trophies, or perhaps like prayers. You're still staring at the little wooden doll when footsteps echo in the corridor outside. Quickly, you shove the items back behind the robes and grab an armload of masks, your heart beating so hard you're certain it can be heard through the stone walls. Itzel, the voice belongs to Tlacaelel, the high priest whose word carries more weight than the emperor's in matters of sacred duty. Are you finding everything you need? You nod, not trusting your voice to remain steady. In the torchlight, his painted face looks like a skull wrapped in shadow, but his tone is gentle. Good, tomorrow begins your final year of preparation. Soon you'll understand the true honor the gods have planned for you. As you walk back to your sleeping chamber, clutching the masks against your chest, his words echo in your mind with new meaning. You've always known this training would end somewhere, but you'd imagined yourself as a priestess, serving the gods through ritual and ceremony. Now, thinking of that hidden collection of personal belongings, you begin to suspect the gods have a different role in mind for you entirely. The question that keeps you awake as the night sounds drift through your window is simple and terrible. What happens to children who learn too much about the true cost of keeping the world balanced? The answer, you're beginning to understand, might be written in blood on stones that have been drinking offerings for longer than anyone remembers. The drums begin before sunrise, their rhythm matching the heartbeat you feel pulsing in your temples as you stand at the edge of the great plaza. 8 years have passed since your arrival at the Karmakak, and today marks the Feast of Toxcatel, the most sacred ceremony of the calendar year, when the chosen one who has lived as a god among mortals returns that divinity to heaven. You watch from the priest's platform as they bring him forward through the crowd. For an entire year, this young man has walked the city as the living embodiment of Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror god. People have knelt when he passed. Children have reached out to touch his robes for blessing. He has eaten the finest foods, worn the most beautiful feathers, slept in chambers more luxurious than the emperor's own. But now, as the obsidian steps stretch upward toward the altar stone, you see something in his painted face that the cheering crowd cannot. Behind the ritual composure, behind the sacred duty, there's a flicker of the same fear you've carried for 8 years, the fear of children who understand too much about the machinery that shapes their fate. He accepts his destiny with grace, Tlacaelel murmurs beside you, his voice carrying approval. As you will, when your time comes. The words hit you like cold water, your time, not if, but when. Around the plaza, thousands of voices rise in the sacred hymns, but all you can hear is the blood rushing in your ears as pieces of understanding fall into place like stones building a wall. The special meals they've been feeding you lately, the extra lessons in purification rituals, the way the other young priests have begun looking at you with a mixture of envy and pity. They're not training you to serve the gods forever. They're preparing you to join them. The Year King reaches the temple's summit, where 4 priests wait with the instruments of release. His chest has been painted with symbols that tell the story of divine sacrifice, how the gods threw themselves into the fire at the beginning of time to create the sun and moon. But as the obsidian blade catches the morning light, you wonder if those ancient gods felt this same desperate urge to run. The sound that follows is wet and final. The crowd's roar drowns out any cry the Year King might have made, but you see his body convulse once before going still. The priest lifts the dripping heart toward the sky, like an offering of dark fruit, and the sun breaks free of the horizon, as if responding to the gift. But you're not watching the heart anymore. You're staring at the Year King's face, now peaceful in death, and thinking about the wooden doll hidden behind the blood-stained robes. Someone carved that toy with love. Someone spent evenings teaching small fingers how to make it dance and speak. Someone grieved when their child was chosen for divine service. The cycle continues, Tlacaelel says, and you realize he's been watching your reaction. Life feeds death, feeds life. Without the offerings, the sun grows weak, the rains fail. The earth turns to dust, and the people starve. We give the gods what they require, so they can give us what we need. You want to ask about the increasing numbers, about why the gods seem to need more hearts each year, more blood, more children, but the questions stick in your throat like thorns. Instead, you nod and help carry the ceremonial implements back to their sacred storage, your hands steady despite the trembling in your chest. Later, in the quiet hours before the evening meal, you find Nakali in the courtyard where he tends the sacred quail. The birds flutter and chirp in their reed cages, oblivious to the fact that they too are destined for sacrifice, their blood needed for smaller ceremonies throughout the year. "Did you see his face?" you ask quietly. "Right before the end?" Nakali's hands pause in their work of scattering grain. The year king, he was honored to serve. The priests say he smiled as his spirit ascended to the house of the Sunday. But did you see his face? Really see it? A long silence stretches between you, filled only with the sound of birds and distant temple bells. When Nakali finally speaks, his voice is barely a whisper. "My sister was chosen for the water ceremony last year, the one where they dress children as rain spirits and lower them into the cenote. She was afraid of deep water. Always had been, since we were small." He doesn't need to say more. You both understand what it means to see past the sacred stories to the human cost beneath. But understanding and accepting are different things entirely. That night, you lie awake listening to the night sounds drifting through your chamber window, owls calling, water lapping against the city's foundations, the distant chanting of priests maintaining their eternal vigil. Somewhere in the darkness, families are grieving loved ones who won't return home. Somewhere else, other children like you are learning that their lives belong not to themselves, but to the hungry balance that keeps the world turning. You think about the Year King's final expression, about your sister Nakali mentioned, about the wooden doll gathering dust behind ceremonial robes. And for the first time, you begin to wonder if there might be other ways to serve the gods, ways that don't require quite so much feeding. The thought is dangerous. Doubt is corruption, the priests teach. Question the sacred order, and you risk bringing chaos down on everyone. But as sleep finally claims you, the doubt has already taken root like a seed in fertile ground. Tomorrow will bring new lessons in divine service, new preparations for the role the gods have chosen for you. But tonight, in the space between sleeping and waking, you allow yourself to imagine a different kind of offering, one that honors the gods through life rather than death. The imagination costs nothing. The acting on it, you're beginning to suspect, might cost everything. The messenger's feet are still bleeding from his sprint across the valley when he collapses before the council of priests, his words tumbling out like water from a broken dam. The Tlaxcalans have closed their borders to the flower wars, refusing to send any more of their young men to die on Aztec altars. You stand in the shadows of the council chamber, officially present to tend the sacred braziers, but really listening to every word that passes between the painted figures seated on their jaguar skin mats. The flames cast dancing shadows on the carved serpents that coil around the stone pillars, making them seem alive and hungry in the flickering light. "This is unprecedented," mutters one of the elder priests, his face painted with the blue spirals of water ceremony. The flower wars have provided suitable offerings for generations. Without captured warriors, how will we meet the requirements of the great festivals? Tlacaelel's voice cuts through the murmurs like an obsidian blade. Then we must look closer to home. The gods care nothing for the politics of tribute cities. They hunger, and we must feed them. The implications hang in the smoky air like copal incense. You've heard whispers in the corridors about increasing quotas, about provincial governors struggling to provide their required numbers. But this is the first time you've witnessed the cold arithmetic of sacred duty being recalculated in real time. The emperor has already agreed, Tlacaelel continues, unrolling a bark paper scroll marked with official seals. Each Kalpuli in the city must provide 2 young people for the next ceremony. The outlying villages will contribute according to their size. Your hands freeze on the bronze brazier you're tending. Kalpuli, the neighborhood units that make up the city's fabric. Your own family lives in one of those districts, in a small house near the canal where your father repairs fishing nets. and your mother weaves reeds into baskets. The arithmetic is simple and terrible. Someone from every neighborhood must die to maintain the cosmic balance. After the council disperses, you follow Nikali to the roof garden, where the sacred herbs grow in careful rows. The city spreads below you like a living map, its canals glittering in the afternoon sunday. From this height, you can see the common people going about their daily work, farmers poling their harvest boats through the waterways, children playing in the plaza, women grinding maize on their roof terraces. They don't know yet, Nikali says quietly, as if reading your thoughts. But they will, soon enough. But you kneel beside him as he tends the morning glory vines, their purple flowers closed tight against the day's heat. These particular blooms will be dried and ground into powder for the priest's visions, their chemicals unlocking doorways to divine revelation. But touching them bare-handed can cause waking dreams and terrible confusion. My cousin Itzpapalotl lives in the Moyotlan district, you whisper. She has 3 children, the youngest is barely walking. Not is do well. Nikali's fingers pause in their work. The gods do not choose based on our preferences. They see what we cannot, which spirits are ready to return to the divine realm. The words sound rehearsed, like lessons repeated until they become automatic responses. But you catch the slight tremor in his voice, the way he won't meet your eyes. Even he struggles with the expanding scope of divine requirements. That evening, during the communal meal, you watch the younger students with new awareness. Sitlali, barely 10 years old, who hums while she braids flowers for the altar decorations. Yautl, who carved a wooden bird so lifelike you expect it to fly away. Tlali, who remembers every prayer after hearing it just once. All of them marked by their talents, their dedication, their perfect suitability for sacred service. All of them potential offerings if the supply of external victims continues to dwindle. The realization sits in your stomach like a cold stone. The Karmakak isn't just a school for priesthood, it's a storehouse of backup sacrifices, children trained to accept their fate with divine grace. The best and brightest, the most faithful and obedient, kept ready for the gods' increasing appetite. Later, while organizing the ritual implements in the storage chamber, you discover something that makes your breath catch. Hidden behind the familiar collection of personal belongings, you find administrative scrolls written in the careful glyphs of temple bureaucracy. Records of negotiations with distant cities offering reduced tribute payments in exchange for young people. Purchase agreements for children from impoverished families. Breeding programs designed to produce offspring with specific physical characteristics prized by different gods. The sacred mysteries, it turns out, include supply chain management. You're still reading when footsteps echo in the corridor. Quickly, you shove the scrolls back into their hiding place and grab an armload of ceremonial masks, but not before glimpsing one final document that freezes your blood. A list of current Kalmikak students, ranked by suitability for various ceremonies. Your own name sits near the top, marked with symbols you recognize from the sacrificial calendars. Finding everything you need, Itzel. Takalel's voice makes you jump, nearly dropping the masks. In the torchlight, his painted face seems to shift and flow like liquid obsidian. Yes, honored priest, just organizing the festival masks. He steps closer, and you smell the familiar mixture of copal and something metallic on his robes. Good. Tomorrow, we begin preparations for the Feast of Ochpanizdli. The harvest celebration requires special attention this year, given our new circumstances. As he speaks, you remember the festival's requirements. Traditionally, it honors Toti, the Earth Mother, through the sacrifice of a mature woman who represents the goddess's fertility. But if the traditional sources are unavailable, the ceremony must continue. The gods cannot be left hungry while mortals debate politics. Walking back to your sleeping chamber, you pass the courtyard where the sacred quail rustle in their cages. Their soft chirping sounds almost like conversation as if they're discussing the strange turns their captivity has taken. Tomorrow, some of them will feed the smaller altars. Next week, others will follow. The cycle continues because it must, because stopping would mean chaos, darkness, the end of everything. But as you lie on your sleeping mat, listening to the night sounds of the great city, you wonder if there might be other kinds of endings, other ways for cycles to conclude. The thought is dangerous, but it grows stronger with each passing day, fed by the evidence of your own eyes and the arithmetic of survival. Outside your window, the lake laps against the city's foundations with the patience of water wearing away stone. Some changes happen quickly, like the blade that stops a heart. Others take longer, like doubt eroding faith, one question at a time. The question that keeps you awake is no longer whether you'll be chosen for divine service. The question is, what you'll do when that choice arrives. The sacred cenote drinks light like a thirsty throat, its dark water swallowing the torch's glow until only shadows remain. You stand at its rim with the other chosen ones, watching the priests prepare for the ceremony that will either save the empire or damn it, depending on whose version of divine will you choose to believe. Below in the water, pale shapes drift like underwater stars. Bones of previous offerings, children who wore the blue face paint of Tlaloc's chosen, who descended into these depths to carry prayers for rain directly to the water god's domain. Their sacrifice supposedly ended the last great drought. Today's ceremony aims to prevent the next one. The signs are clear, Tlacaelel announces to the assembled crowd. The water levels drop, the maize grows poorly. The gods grow restless. His voice echoes off the cenote's limestone walls, multiplying into a chorus of accusation. We have grown complacent in our offerings. The divine realm requires greater proof of our devotion. You count the children lined up beside you, 12 this time, ranging from barely walking to your own age of 15. Each wears the turquoise jewelry that marks them as Tlaloc's property, their faces painted with blue spirals that mirror the water's movement. They stand perfectly still, trained never to show fear in the presence of the sacred. But you see it anyway, in the way little Sipactli's fingers tremble as he clutches his jade amulet, in how Yautl keeps glancing toward the path that leads back to the surface, back to the world of sunlight and growing things. In the careful breathing of Itzel, not you, but another girl who shares your name, chosen because the calendar stones declared her birth date especially pleasing to the rain god. The youngest offerings wear expressions of dreamy confusion. They've been given sacred mushrooms to make them compliant, their fear dissolved into visions of underwater gardens and singing fish. The older children need no such assistance. They've been preparing for this moment their entire lives, taught that drowning in sacred water opens a direct path to divine favor. You remember your own preparation sessions, hours spent learning to hold your breath, to remain calm when water closes over your head, to see spiritual meaning in the burning sensation of lungs desperate for air. The priests framed it as privilege. Not every child gets chosen to speak directly with Tlaloc in his underwater palace. The ceremony requires perfect offerings, Tlacaelel continues, his painted face grotesque in the shifting light. Those who sink quickly show the god's acceptance. Those who struggle reveal their unworthiness, but even unworthy deaths feed the sacred cycle. The logistics of divine communication, explained with bureaucratic precision. As the first child approaches the water's edge, you notice something that makes your trained composure crack. Among the priests directing the ceremony stands your old teacher, the woman who taught you to read the sacred books, who praised your quick mind and gentle hands with the temple animals. She watches the proceedings with the same professional attention she once gave to your pronunciation of ancient prayers. When your eyes meet, she offers a small smile of encouragement, as if you're about to recite a difficult text rather than drown in sacred water. The splash echoes like thunder in the confined space. Sipactli disappears beneath the surface, his small form swallowed by darkness that reflects nothing. The watching crowd counts heartbeats, measuring divine acceptance by how long the water remains still. After 30 beats, bubbles rise to the surface. After 50, nothing. Tlaloc has received the offering, the head priest declares, making notations on a bark paper scroll. The rain god's thirst is partially satisfied. One by one, the children enter the water. Some sink immediately, their lungs filled with sacred liquid in preparation for the journey to the underwater realm. Others struggle briefly before disappearing, their movements sending ripples across the surface like messages written in a language only gods can read. You are the seventh to approach the edge, your feet bare on the slick limestone that has been worn smooth by centuries of such ceremonies. The water below looks black as obsidian, its surface broken only by the occasional bubble rising from the depths where small bodies settle into the muddy bottom. But as you pause at the threshold between air and water, between life and divine service, something unprecedented happens. From somewhere in the watching crowd comes a voice cracked with age but clear in its defiance. This is not what the gods demand. The speaker is an old woman, her face painted with the patterns of a daykeeper, one of the wise ones, who read meaning in the movements of stars and the spacing of calendar days. She pushes through the crowd despite the guards' attempts to restrain her, her voice growing stronger as she continues. I have read the oldest books, the ones that predate this madness. The water god asks for flowers, for songs, for the first fruits of harvest, not children, never so many children. The crowd's murmur turns dangerous. Challenging the sacred order in the middle of ceremony borders on cosmic treason. But the old woman continues, her words carrying the authority of someone who has spent decades studying divine will through legitimate scholarly methods. Look at the water, she demands, pointing toward the cenote's dark surface. See how it grows thick with offerings. The god chokes on our gifts. We offer so much death that we forget how to nurture life. Tlacaelel's face hardens like cooling obsidian. Remove this woman. Her mind has been corrupted by age and doubt. But you see something else in his expression, a flicker of uncertainty, quickly suppressed but unmistakably present. As guards surround the old woman, she catches your eye and speaks words meant for you alone. The choice is yours, child. The gods speak through actions, not just through death. The guards drag her away, but her words echo in the stone chamber like ripples spreading across still water. Around you, the remaining children wait for the ceremony to continue, their training keeping them outwardly calm despite the disruption. But you sense a change in the atmosphere, a subtle shift from religious certainty to something more complex. Standing at the water's edge, you realize you face a choice that will define not just your own fate but the meaning of divine service itself. You can step forward into the water, fulfilling the role the priests have prepared for you, adding your death to the accounting of souls that supposedly keeps the world balanced. Or you can step backward, refusing the offering, challenging a system that has grown beyond sacred necessity into something darker. The water waits, patient as stone, ready to receive whatever choice you make. Above, the priests hold their breath, their painted faces reflecting nothing but professional expectation. Around the cenote's rim, the crowd watches with the intensity of people witnessing either miracle or catastrophe. In that suspended moment, you understand that the most dangerous offerings are often those we make without questioning their true purpose. The old woman's words echo in your mind as you look down into the dark water that has swallowed so many before you. The gods, you realize, might be hunger for something entirely different than what they've been fed. Your next step will declare which version of divine will you choose to serve, the one written in administrative scrolls and enforced through fear, or the older one, the daykeeper claims to have found in books that predate the current madness. The choice belongs to you alone. The water waits for your answer. Your foot hovers over the dark water as the silence stretches like a bowstring pulled to its breaking point. In that suspended moment, you make a choice that will either damn you as a heretic or reveal truths the Empire has buried beneath layers of sacred justification. You step backward. The gasp that rises from the watching crowd sounds like wind through dry leaves. Priests freeze mid-gesture, their painted faces reflecting shock that quickly hardens into something more dangerous. The remaining children beside you turn to stare, their training warring with the evidence of their own eyes. Someone has refused the god's call. Itzel, Tlacaelel's voice carries the calm that comes before violence. You have been honored above all others. The water god himself has chosen you for divine conversation. Step forward and accept your blessing. But you've seen too much, learned too much, counted too many hearts in the administrative scrolls hidden behind ceremonial robes. The blessing he speaks of is arithmetic disguised as divinity, quotas dressed in sacred language. I choose to serve the gods through life, you say, your voice barely a whisper, but carrying clearly in the stone chamber's acoustics. Not through death. The old woman's words have planted something in your mind that grows stronger with each heartbeat. If the gods truly require death to sustain the world, why does the world grow hungrier with each offering? Why do the quotas increase while the Empire's enemies multiply and its harvests fail? Tlacaelel descends from the platform where he's been overseeing the ceremony, his obsidian-studded robes rustling like serpent scales. Around the cenote's rim, guards shift their grip on their weapons, unsure whether they're witnessing religious crisis or treasonous rebellion. You speak from ignorance, he says, close enough now that you can smell the blood that never quite washes from his ceremonial garments. The cosmic balance requires— I've read your administrative records, you interrupt, surprising yourself with the steadiness of your own voice. I know about the purchase orders, the breeding programs, the negotiations with tribute cities. The gods aren't hungry, the Empire Island. A murmur ripples through the crowd like stones thrown into still water. These are dangerous words, accusations that strike at the foundation of everything the people have been taught to believe about divine will and sacred necessity. But you continue, because the truth has been building pressure inside your chest like steam in a covered pot. The oldest books speak of offerings of flowers, songs, the first fruits of harvest. When did the gods start demanding so much blood? When did sacred duty become systematic slaughter? Tlacaelel's hand moves to the obsidian knife at his belt. Around the cenote, you see other priests making similar gestures. The ceremony has become something else entirely, a trial, where your life hangs on the words you choose next. The child speaks blasphemy, calls one of the elder priests. She has been corrupted by doubt. Let her join the offerings to cleanse her spirit. But before anyone can move toward you, another voice joins the conversation. Nakali steps forward from among the junior priests, his watercolored eyes bright with something that might be relief or terror. She speaks what others have whispered, he says quietly. The numbers grow each year. The god's appetite increases while the people's strength fails. Perhaps we should listen to the questions instead of silencing them. More murmurs from the crowd, but different, now uncertainty rather than outrage. You realize that doubt has been spreading like cracks in temple stone, hidden but persistent. Your refusal has simply given voice to fears others have carried in secret. Tlacaelel's painted face twists with rage barely controlled. You are children playing with forces beyond your understanding. The cosmic order cannot be questioned by those too young to comprehend its necessity. Then, explain it. You challenge, surprising everyone, including yourself. If the gods require so much death, why do they accept it from unwilling victims? Why do the youngest offerings need sacred mushrooms to make them compliant? Why do the administrative records speak of quotas and supply chains rather than divine communication? The questions hang in the air, like smoke from the sacred braziers. Around the cenote, you see faces in the crowd, reflecting thoughts they've never allowed themselves to think aloud. Parents who've lost children to divine service, warriors who've captured enemies for sacrifice but wondered about the justice of it. Merchants who've profited from the trade in human lives but never examined the moral cost. The girl asks dangerous questions, says the head priest, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. But perhaps danger serves a purpose. Let her provide answers through her own sacrifice. Let the gods judge her words directly. Guards move forward, their obsidian-tipped spears catching the torchlight. But as they advance, something unprecedented happens. Other voices join yours, not many, but enough to matter. Wait. The speaker is Citlali's mother, a woman who lost her youngest daughter to the rain ceremonies 2 seasons ago. I want to hear more of these questions. As do I. This from a veteran warrior whose son was selected for flower war sacrifice. The boy died bravely, but he died young. If there are other ways to serve the gods. The crowd's mood shifts, like wind changing direction before a storm. What began as religious ceremony has become something more complex, a moment when long-suppressed doubts surface into daylight. Tlacaelel recognizes the danger immediately. Enough, he declares, his voice cutting through the murmurs like an obsidian blade. The ceremony will continue. The gods will not be denied their due because of one child's corruption. But even as he speaks, you see uncertainty in his painted features. The absolute authority that has sustained the sacrificial system depends on unquestioning faith. Once people begin asking why, the entire structure becomes vulnerable to scrutiny. The remaining children beside you, those who haven't yet entered the sacred water, stand frozen between competing versions of divine will. Their training tells them to step forward, to accept the honor of divine communion. But your defiance has introduced the possibility that honor might lie elsewhere. In the stone chamber's uncertain light, surrounded by the bones of previous offerings and the expectations of generations, you realize you've reached a moment that will define not just your own fate, but the future of everyone who serves the god's supposed hunger. The water waits, patient and dark. The priests watch with weapons ready. The crowd holds its breath, caught between sacred tradition and dangerous questions. What happens next will determine whether your refusal becomes the first crack in an empire built on blood, or simply another offering to the dark water that drinks light and life with equal thirst. The choice belongs not just to you anymore, but to everyone who has witnessed this moment of truth, spoken in the presence of gods who may be far different than the priests have claimed. The obsidian blade presses against your throat as dawn breaks over Tenochtitlan, painting the temple stones the color of fresh blood. 3 days have passed since your refusal at the cenote. 3 days of imprisonment in the chambers beneath the great temple, where the walls weep with moisture and the darkness never fully retreats. But something has shifted in the city above, something that makes Tlacaelel's hand tremble slightly as he holds the knife that should end your heresy once and for all. "Do you hear that?" he asks, his painted face haggard with sleepless nights. Through the stone walls comes a sound that makes your heart leap, voices, raised not in the familiar hymns of sacrifice, but in questions, demands, the dangerous music of people who have started thinking for themselves. The infection of doubt you planted at the cenote has spread faster than anyone expected. Parents refusing to surrender their children for divine service. Warriors questioning the necessity of flower wars that seem to feed empire more than gods. Even some priests whispering about the oldest texts, the ones that speak of offerings of maize and flowers rather than hearts and blood. Your corruption spreads like disease, Tlacaelel continues, but his voice lacks its usual authority. The people forget their sacred duties, they question divine will itself. You meet his gaze without flinching, though the obsidian edge draws a thin line of crimson across your skin. Maybe they're remembering older truths, maybe the gods are tired of choking on so much death. Outside, the sounds grow louder. You recognize Nikali's voice among them. and others from the Kalmakak young priests trained to serve but now questioning what that service truly means. The revolution you started, with a single step backward, has found its own momentum. The emperor has ordered public sacrifice. Takalel says, pressing the blade deeper, "Your death will remind the people of the price of defying divine order. Your blood will wash away the corruption you've spread." But even as he speaks, you hear footsteps in the corridor, outside many footsteps, moving with purpose rather than reverence. The chamber door, sealed with sacred symbols and imperial authority, begins to shake under repeated blows. "Itzel!" Nekali's voice echoes through stone and wood. "We're coming." Talakaelul's face contorts with rage and something else, fear of a system collapsing beneath the weight of its own contradictions. The knife wavers at your throat as he realizes that killing you now might create a martyr rather than end a rebellion. The door splinters inward, revealing not just the young priests you expected, but others' parents who've lost children to divine service, warriors who've grown sick of harvesting captives for altar stones, even some of the older priests whose studies of ancient texts have revealed how far the current practices have strayed from original sacred intent. "Step away from her," Nikali commands, his usually gentle voice carrying new authority. In his hands, he holds not weapons but bark paper scrolls, the administrative records you discovered, the evidence of quotas and trade agreements that reduce divine service to bureaucratic accounting. "The people deserve to know the truth," declares the old daykeeper who spoke at the cenote, pushing forward despite her age. "They deserve to understand what their children actually die for." Takalel releases you and steps back, the obsidian knife dropping from fingers that shake with more than anger. Around him, the chamber fills with people who represent a choice between two visions of divine service, one that demands ever-increasing sacrifice, and another that seeks to honor gods through life rather than death. "You fools," he whispers, his painted face cracking like dried mud. "Without the offerings, the sun will die. The world will end in darkness and chaos. Then let us try other offerings," you say, finding your voice stronger now that it's joined by others. "Let us give the gods what the oldest books actually request: flowers, songs, the work of our hands and hearts, rather than our blood." The debate that follows will echo through history. In the chamber beneath the great temple, surrounded by the apparatus of sacrifice, representatives of an empire argue about the true nature of divine will. Some insist that only blood can maintain cosmic balance. Others point to the evidence how the system has grown beyond religious necessity into political control, how the quotas increase while the empire's strength decreases. But the real decision happens outside, in the streets and neighborhoods where ordinary people choose whether to surrender their children to ancient demands or protect them through newer understanding. The revolution isn't won with weapons but with questions, with parents who refuse to accept that gods require the deaths of innocents, with priests who remember that the sacred can be served through creation rather than destruction. Years pass. The Spanish arrive with their own version of divine conquest, their own demands for conversion and submission. Tenochtitlan falls, not to superior weapons, but to diseases that kill more efficiently than any sacrifice ever imagined. But in the ruins of empire, archaeologists will find evidence of something unprecedented. A brief period when the sacrificial system faltered, when ordinary people questioned divine authority and demanded different ways of serving the sacred. Your refusal at the cenote becomes part of a larger story about the courage required to step backward from systemic cruelty, even when that cruelty claims divine sanction. The obsidian blade that pressed against your throat is eventually found buried beneath Christian churches built on temple foundations. Museum displays will label it as ceremonial instrument, artifact of a civilization that believed gods required blood to sustain the world. But they missed the deeper truth you discovered in that chamber filled with children's toys and administrative records. The most dangerous sacrifices are often those we accept without questioning, the systems that grow beyond their original purpose until they consume the very people they claim to protect. In modern Mexico City, built over the bones of Tenochtitlan, tourists photograph temple ruins and listen to guides explain ancient practices with academic detachment. Few recognize the universal truth embedded in your story, that every generation must choose between inherited cruelty and conscious compassion, between the safety of unquestioned tradition and the risk of moral courage. Your name is forgotten, lost among thousands who lived and died in service to gods both real and imagined. But the choice you made at the cenote's edge echoes through time, the decision to step backward from an altar that demanded too much, to question divine authority that looked remarkably like human appetite for power and control. The blade never fell. The questions you raised spread like ripples on dark water, reaching shores you never imagined. In the end, you kept faith not with gods who demanded blood, but with the human capacity to recognize when sacred duty becomes systematic destruction. The drums have long since fallen silent, but the choice between different kinds of offering continues in every generation, between sacrifice and service, between tradition and conscience, between the easy path of accepted cruelty and the harder way of conscious compassion. Your foot, hovering over sacred water, chose life. The choice echoes still, reminding us that the most important revolutions often begin with a single person brave enough to step backward from an altar that has grown too hungry, too demanding, too divorced from the love that should inspire all genuine offerings to the divine. The water remains dark, patient, waiting for better gifts than the ones it has been given. Somewhere in its depths, the bones of innocence rest easier, knowing that others chose differently, that the questions you raised found voices willing to speak them aloud. The revolution may have ended with empire's fall, but the truth you uncovered remains, that gods worthy of worship never require the sacrifice of those who trust them most completely.